So yes, it's colloquial wildlife names in Northern Ireland, not just the boring wildlife names in Northern Ireland. But yeah, anyway, it's not comprehensive. This is just dipping the toes into different wildlife names that are found locally for a variety of types of wildlife, birds, insects, and some flowers. Can't please everybody, so I'll put my hands up, and it's maybe a bit bird heavy. This maybe a bit other wildlife heavy. There's lots and lots of names for wildlife, and we can't include them all. And the other thing I would say before I go on is there's so many variants of local names. So I might say a name, you say he spelled that wrong. Some variants have dozens of spellings. So yeah, I'll just launch into it. So nothing comprehensive, just a little dander through some of the local names that we have for wildlife. And I suppose, yeah, we start with the barn owl. Why? Iconic bird, easily recognizable bird. An awful lot of people know it from folklore, from film, television, media, things like that. So yeah, barn owls, yeah, that is the English name, Tyto alba, alba meaning white in Latin. But yeah, there you go. It's also known locally in Northern Ireland. One of the local names would have been just simply white owl. Now, if this talk keeps going on like this, people are going to think this isn't very interesting. Barn owl, white owl. Yeah, not yeah. What can you do? I mean, that's just what people call it. Because at night, if people had seen it at night in moonlight or around graveyards, things like that, the haunts that people would have associated with, it looks all white, especially when it spreads its wings. So yeah, white owl. Or also screech owl, to do with the call. And scrike owl, a Scots word. Not quite sure what the scrike owl is. I mean, this is hopefully the beauty of this talk, because I've really just pulled together some words on names. Sorry, but yeah, I can say this is what people call this animal or this creature, but I don't necessarily always have the meaning of it. So scrike owl, probably something similar to same word root as screech owl, I would imagine, something like that, perhaps, but I could be wrong. There's the Scots, which white owl. But this is the thing, different. It's a dialectal thing, so different parts of the country call different things. It would be white owl, white owl, and go to another part of the country. This is the beauty of these things, is that there's a limitless quality to the local aspect to it. So almost townland to townland or valley to valley. Sometimes these local names change. And then you have the Irish. I'm not going to pronounce it because I'll not be able to do it justice. I'm not an Irish speaker, and I'm not going to offend anybody by not, goodness knows I could pronounce it. It might mean something completely different and get myself into trouble. But graveyard screamer or screecher. So yeah, screech owl, scrike owl, graveyard screamer. Yeah, and the association there. The sort of mythological folklore. This is where these words come from. They come from either association with habitat, association with aspects of human culture, or the physical attributes of the birds itself, or the oral attributes, how it sounds. So graveyard screecher, graveyard screamer, totally appropriate for a barn owl. And then there we go. It appears in the landscape. Actually, one of our nature reserves, Glenullen Bog. Glenullen itself in Irish means Valley of the Eagle. It's near a place called Braca, which is place of the badger. And Lisna is the townland, which means fort of the screech owl. So you have that Irish root, and you have it in the landscape. So obviously, an area where barn owls were known in the past to frequent. Where would you say a barn owl today? Difficult. But I mean, thanks to the work that we're doing, especially Katie Bell and Ross McElrath, who are species officers, there's an awful lot of barn owl boxes going up, and we know more about barn owls in Northern Ireland perhaps than we ever did. So it's not a complete success. It's getting there though. We're on the right track. So yeah, that's the barn owl, an iconic bird. Lapwing. Why have I included lapwing? Well, lapwing probably has more vernacular names or colloquial names than any other bird in the UK and Ireland. I couldn't list them all. There you go. The most boring one, the English one, the old English one, would just simply have been green plover, because that's the bird family that it sits within. So green plover, not that exciting. Peewit and peewit, and this is where we get into, well, does lapwing have more names than any other British or Irish bird? or is it just variations on a theme? Because there will be numerous spellings of peewits and peewits, and it goes on. Peeweep, peesweep. I can't. When you look these things up, you think is somebody taking the mickey here? But no, this is it. This is the dialectal forms. This is the beauty of the diversity of the dialects in language. But they all have you can see where things have a common root. And peeweet, because of the sound that it makes, it, especially the males and display flight. There we go, yet another one, peeweep. If I had £1 for every version that I could find, I'd have a fair penny. And then these strange other roots that you have, lapine and wallopy. I don't know what the root of those are, whether they're Scots or whether they're Irish or whether they're English. But then even the name lapwing in Latin, vanellus. So the Latin's vanellus. That means fan wing. So there's ways to mine these names of birds, whether it's in English, whether it's in local vernacular, or whether it's in the Latin root. So yeah, if you're into this sort of thing, etymology, it can be very interesting, but it take you down an awful lot of rabbit holes. A wop, that is a Scots word for curlew, and curlew is a French word. There we go, and it appears in the landscape. There's a place in County Antrim called Wapstown, which was named after somebody called Wap. But yeah, it say his name was Brian. Well, Brian Wap is like saying my name's Brian Curlew. Seems a bit weird. How do you end up with a name? The sobriquet Curlew. But yeah, Wapstown. So it occurs in the landscape. Interestingly, that's named after a surname, the townland. But that particular County Antrim is actually one of the last strongholds for curlew. So there's a bit of synchronicity there. And then there's the root, Corley and Corlew. So a French root. And honestly, before I actually looked at this properly, I would have thought curlew was a Scots word or an Irish word, but no, it's a French root. And there's a great word, a Scots word, rainbird, which I think is quite apt. When you see, a flock of curlew coming in, or a curlew fighting against the wind, or a squall, and yeah, a rainbird. I think some of these words are very evocative of the creatures themselves. It's obviously they're named after people who know their habits. So yeah, it's another one. And then another one which is just weird. It's the black-tailed godwit, which has again the Scots word Norwegian curlew. Where they got that, I don't know. Norwegian curlew. I mean, what we know actually in modern times about our black-tailed godwits that come visit the shores of Northern Ireland in winter and at passage periods is, I think the vast majority of them breed in Iceland. So if anything, it should have been an Icelandic curlew. But maybe they had another bird with that name, so we thought, well, we'll stick Norwegian on it. It's up. It flies north. Must be somewhere up there. Yeah, Norwegian curlew will do. So. But these things get very confusing because there's bird names that swap over, and what we might call X, somebody else calls X, but they mean completely different thing. So that's a wop. Then the meadow pipit. The meadow pipit's an interesting bird. Interesting bird in the sense that it's a bird that can be found from the shore right up to near the top of Slieve Donard. It inhabits an awful lot of habits in between, except woodland. But yeah, meadow pipits, and the name it usually gets is cuckoo's maid, because when it comes to cuckoo, they're a kleptoparasite. So basically, they lay their eggs in another bird's nest and let the parents of the victims, if you like, rear the cuckoo's chick, and it goes off and does its own thing. So yeah, the cuckoo's maid. Sorry, there's somebody trying to phone me, and I don't know why. Apologies. So yeah, cuckoo's maid. And basically it's called the cuckoo's maid because the cuckoo basically has, in the UK and Ireland, has about 3 main hosts. In the east of England, East Anglia, it's reed warblers. So you think of the fens and areas like that. Throughout most of England, it's Dunnock. But when you get to Scotland and Ireland, it's meadow pipits. Invariably, it's meadow pipits. So nice to hear the cuckoo, but maybe not if you're a meadow pipit. But then the thing is, the meadow pipits have no idea. Otherwise, they wouldn't fall for the trick. So the cuckoo's maid. And also, I'm not going to do any disservice by a mispronunciation, but in Irish, it's also known as the cuckoo's nursemaid. Bird watchers, not a Northern Ireland name, but bird watchers simply, not bird watchers can be quite lazy when it comes to birds. Mippet, meadow pipit, mippet, and there's another Irish name for it, which quite another really nice little streaked one of the ball. I think that's quite apt, because a lot of the time it's one of the only birds you'll see out on a high bog, apart from maybe skylarks seeing them. But then my favourite word for a meadow pipit is moss cheaper. It's a Scots word, and just I think it for me it says it all, because you're out on a bog or you're on the shore and you hear them, and yeah, it not doesn't work for everybody perhaps, but that one works for me. Then the Manx shearwater, Puffinus because they were the original puffin, because people ate the birds, so puffinus refers to the puffed up young chicks, lovely and tasty. Stick it in a bag, take it home and eat it. But hard times, people had to do what they had to do. But so the puffin originally, the name applied to the Manx shearwater chicks. But down around my part of County Down, we call them mackerel cocks. That's what they are, mackerel cocks, because when they come in, we know the fishing soon after them, And then if we're out fishing, I'm from Newcastle, so Dundrum Bay would be my hunt. If we're out fishing, you're looking to see where the birds feed. So mackerel cock is sort of, it's a bird that's, the name in itself, the name in itself to me is almost like a season. It's that time of year, So just a nice local name. And then another local name, a heron hog, which not a great photograph, but that's a harbour porpoise. And heron hog because of the snub, blunt face, and also because of the puff. They call it puffin pig, I think, up round and McGee direction, County Antrim. For me, it's a heron hog, or hern hog, as they would say around sort of Mourne. Sort of compress the word, more economical use of language, I guess, is the way they were going with hern hog. But it's basically, a pig of the sea. And then another creature that, you think, yes, fish, because they're only going to be about if they're fishing. Great places to see them. Dundrum Bay is a classic one off Bloody Bridge. All around the coast. But Isle of Muck, one of our nature reserves off Isle of McGee, is a particularly good site. It's actually designated in part because of the high density of harbour porpoise. They even say that it's the highest density of harbour porpoise around Isle of Muck and Portmuck in Northern Ireland. And perhaps even, not a great photograph, but some people say it give its name to the island, Isle of Muck, because muck means pig in Irish. Some people said, it's called Isle of Muck because obviously then people would have grazed pigs out there. Well, good luck grazing pigs out there. But people say from certain angles, whenever you look at the hump of the island, that it looks like the hump of the breaching harbour porpoise. And certainly the area is, and probably has been for millennia, important for harbour porpoise. So although again, you see, I prefer these local names because harbour porpoise just sounds too formal. A heron hog seems a bit more natural, and more evocative. I've used that word before, but yeah, evocative is the word. So Isle of Muck. Then this is another one, a scart. Scots word, and still in use quite a lot, especially around the Ards Peninsula, Strangford Loch. In fact, the Scart Rock. And why is it called a scart? Well, it's a cormorant or a shag, predominantly cormorant. And why do they call it a scart? Well, when in ye olden days, we can say that in ye olden days, when people were gutting fish, primarily women, especially at times of when the herring was in and the herring fisheries were in full swing, they had to wash their skirts. They were covered in fish oil and blood and guts, and they had to wash their skirts. So you wash your skirts are wet. So they used to pull out the skirts and dry them in the sun, which people say is what that bird's doing, the cormorant, because the cormorant doesn't have a preening gland and it needs to dry out. That's why it does it. It has to dry out its feathers, and same with the shag. So they don't have the same waterproofing as other seabirds. So people associated that, the women drying their skirts in the sun, with the scart. So scart. And again, there's variations on the spelling, Cart, and we go on and on. But yeah, and again, what do you see? These birds all around the coast and in inland waters as well. Around where I live as well, Seaford is a town nearby. And, locally, people would have talked about the black geese of Seaford. They're not geese at all, they're cormorants, but they would have flown into Seaford Estate into trees to roost in the evening, and people would have seen the skeins of, and again, geese, a skein, a cormorant, maybe that's not the collective noun, but that's what they called them, black geese. And then a really mad word there, an obviously Scots word, a woolly ducker. It's a bit hard to look at a cormorant the same way once you know that you should be calling it a woolly ducker. I don't know what that means. It could, for all I know, it could be extremely rude. I could get myself in trouble, but sure, it wouldn't be the first time. But yeah, so there you go, common bird. And this association between the bird's habits and humans' habits is about people making linkages themselves, culturally to these birds, and all those connectivity. It makes them more important in the landscape. If you can't put a name to something, it means nothing. It means nothing, and it's of no importance to you. Once you put a name to something, you start to think maybe it has a purpose. Even the most, as I'll use a Scots word, even the most thran of people, you can, if you don't know what that is, you can look it up, but you don't want to meet a thran person. Then there's another one, the northern fulmar, Fulmarus glacialis. Glacialis should give you a kind of indication where historically this bird, resides. It's a bird of the sea, spends most of its time in the open ocean and at northerly latitudes. Glacialis. It's at home in the high Arctic. Well, maybe not the high Arctic, but in the Arctic. But it first bred in Ireland, Donegal in 1907. So hence there was no word for a fulmar. There was no word for a fulmar in Irish. There was no word for a fulmar in Scots. And so it simply became the new gull. It's sort of blinding, unassailable simplicity there. But yeah, I like that. I kind of like, what's that? Oh, that's one of them new gulls. Makes sense. Makes perfect sense. And amazing to think that Fulmar, is only breeding in Ireland less than 120 years. So it shows you, things are always in flux. Things are always changing. Then fieldfare, just a rather simple one. It's widely known as a felt. I do not know what the root of that is. Presumably some Scandinavian root or Scots root. It sounds very Scandinavian and probably has a specific meaning, but hey, I didn't do enough background research on that, even though it's a name that I've heard all my life because my father would use it all the time. He'd talk about felts. And another great, a frost bird. And it is, when I think of field, the winter thrushes is the collective term, winter thrushes, fieldfares and redwings. And they'll, hedgerows and fields can be just, speckled with them. There can be flocks of hundreds of them. And yeah, I always think, when I see that name frostbird, I think of a field with, with fieldfares jumping around, but hopping around in it and flying to and fro. Yeah, really, really meaningful word when you know the bird. Then another one was quite common, another Scots one again, black guillemot, also known as the black puffin. That's maybe not as common, but teisty, yeah. Teisty is a Scots word used a lot. It's also used in Ulster Scots as well. It's a word that's actually been adopted by bird watchers. So bird watchers, it carries a bit of kudos, a bit of cool if you don't refer to it as a black guillemot. Oh, it's a teisty. That's this is the world that bird watchers live in. It's a very strange word, but yeah, some of them think it seems to separate the bird watcher from the non-bird watcher. Whatever floats the boat, but teisty is a better word, a more get your tongue around word than black guillemot. A beautiful creature anyway. And again, so there are noticeable hotspots. County Down coast particularly good for them, but all around the coast, rocky coasts and harbours. Places like Annalong, places like Newcastle, Bangor Marina, Glenarm Marina in County Antrim. All really, really good place to see these birds, and you can get really, really up close to them. Hooded crow, ubiquitous bird, but just an example of how many different words are used for it. Greyback, hoodie, a craa. A black neb, a scald crow. I guess the scald crow is scald as in scalded, so it looks like the back maybe the lighter, the differentiation, the two-tone is maybe something to do with that. But again, I could be completely wrong. The red grouse, Lagopus lagopus. Well, again, another one where even in the Latin, Lagopus lagopus, they have quite feathered feet. They're a bird of of high altitude, of moors and high altitude, in parts of its range. And yeah, Lagopus means the hare-footed one. So yeah, it's because of the coverings on the feet. But so a bit of language play in the naming of the bird in Latin. But it's also known as a heather poet, a heather cock, one that was told me from a guy from Long, corncock. Whether it's true or not, but yeah, I said to people about it being called corncock. People said, no, you're thinking of corncrake, and said, no, I'm thinking of corncock. So the story I was told is that there were that many red grouse in the higher fields in Mourne that they would come down and they would crow from the top of corn sticks. Whether that's true or not, it's a habit I haven't actually heard anybody else refer to. But these things linger in folk memory, and yeah, and I'm not going to argue with somebody from Allalong. Simple as that. And a moorhen as well, quite confusingly, moorhen, even though we have a moorhen in English. But then there's a parallel there of moorhun in German. I probably didn't pronounce that in German correctly either. So if there's any Germans out there, I'm sorry if I've offended you. Another bird that we see quite often, the grey heron, a heron cran. That's what's known, at least in County Down and probably wider in Northern Ireland. And then you get all these variations: a heron cran, a cran, Johnny Crane, oops. And then not a Northern Ireland one, but bird watchers, and quite common in England, Big Frank or Frank. And that's simply because when a heron flies over, it goes, Frank. So listen out for that the next time you hear it and think, oh, he's just shouted Frank at me. And one of my favorites, and I wanted to go more into this and look at, but it's a real bad rabbit hole, these bird names and wildlife names. You could have went into all the different other countries and their names, but that's one of my favorite. I spent some time in Catalonia, and they call grey heron Bernat pescaira, which is Bernard the fisherman. So every time I see a grey heron, I think, oh, look, there's old Bernard the fisherman. It's the road. I think if you went around Europe, you would find all these variations, and some of them are very humorous. And there's a couple of Irish. Norrie the Bogs, I can't pronounce it, but that is Sheila. I've left a fat out there, and in Sheila, Julie the Bogs, and again Nora. No, I can't pronounce it. I apologize, but there's a fad I missed out on Nora. So Nora of the Bogs and Sheila of the Bogs. So again, that's putting a human name, a person's forename. Big Frank, Bernard the fisherman, Sheila of the Bogs, and Julie of the Bogs. We're humanizing these creatures because we see an awful lot of human aspects and how they behave. Things can get kind of unhelpful when you're looking at history books, because in Northern Ireland and other parts of Ireland, a kite and a buzzard were interchangeable. So yeah, when you're reading about the kite, were they talking about a buzzard or a kite? At least nowadays, we do separate them. But yeah, sometimes these names interesting, but sometimes unhelpful. If you can see it there, I can't because of the screen, but a tree creeper is known in Northern Ireland as a woodpecker. Before woodpeckers arrived in, I think, around in the early 2000s or mid 2000s. So yeah, I saw a woodpecker today. Oh, brilliant! And you go, and it's a tree creeper. You get quite disappointed. Nothing wrong with a tree creeper, though. I love tree creepers. But yeah, it's slightly unhelpful, or lead you down the wrong garden path. Let's see, and yeah, and again, that bird is a yellow wagtail, and below is a weasel. Yeah, well, in Northern Ireland, a yellow wagtail is a grey wagtail. So we say, and yet and you think as a bird watcher, you think, oh, you've got it wrong. It's not. A yellow wagtail is a yellow wagtail. This bright yellow fella. Well, actually, the local name was yellow wagtail for the grey wagtail, and the weasel is a stoat. So we don't get weasels in Ireland. We get stoats, Irish stoat. Yet the local name for a stoat is a weasel. It gets a bit confusing. Even more confusing. Here we go. This the stoat is known as a weasel, but it's also known as a witherick. Now you don't forget a word like a witherick, really. The word a what? A what? A witherick. Okay, I'm not going to forget that word. Yeah, except some people call it Colloquial witherick. Now that's getting just very confusing. And then I found out that yes, a witherick can also be a little grebe and a dab chick. Well, I'm just going to stick to what I know, and a witherick's a weasel. Oh, I mean, a stoat. I'm doing it myself. But yeah, how confusing is that? So we have a witherick, a witherick, and a witherick. So yeah, a bit of a minefield out there, I would say. That's all. But yeah, for me, a witherick is a stoat. Then you get another birds, and this is the end of the birds at least. It's a bit bird heavy, I guess. All the different words locally for yellowhammer. Chitterariri must be related to the call. People talk of the hammer's call classically as a little bit of bread and a piece of cheese. But yeah, one of the other ones, the one that I've highlighted, quite rude actually. I could get myself in trouble if I don't choose my words carefully here. Yellow Yorlin, or a yellow Yorlin, is the name for a yellowhammer in Scots, and is still used in parts of County Down, which is the stronghold for yellowhammers, because of the arable country. But actually, it also refers to a part of a female's anatomy. And Robbie Burns actually wrote a poem called A Yellow Yellow Yorlin. And actually, it's quite a racy poem. In fact, it's totally on PC. It's the sort of thing that you couldn't write today. But yeah, he talks about the yellow yellow Yorlin and things like that. So how does that happen? How does a bird like the yellowhammer be associated with, naughty things, essentially? Unless people thought it was a very naughty bird. Who knows? I better move on swiftly, as I say, before I get myself in trouble. I haven't included very many plants, but there's a classic one from County Fermanagh, the blue button. So it's the devil's bit scabious, and probably few things that are apt, for something like devil's bit scabious. It just there's a straightforwardness there, and a correctness. A blue button, it just makes perfect sense when you see the flower at its peak. I haven't dwelt too much on flowers, as I say. So I could have went down another rabbit hole, and I didn't have the time. The talk would end up hundreds of slides long. But there's, at a first thought, I didn't think. I was struggling to think of local names for plants, and I spoke to one of our directors, Peter McVoy, and he reminded me. He said, "Oh, think about cleavers," and yeah, of course, Robin Run the Head, Sticky Willie, Goosegrass, and you can go on and on and on for cleavers. And there's plenty of local vernacular names for plants. I suppose I'd just leave that up to you to do some homework yourself, because I wouldn't have had time to pull everything together all in one presentation. Here we go, straying away from birds, perhaps thankfully for some people. Rock, badger, it's in Scots and it's in Irish, it seems to be the same word. And I stuck this up because the badgers are so ubiquitous in the Irish countryside, such a familiar animal, and must have been since historical times. You can find a reference to a townland name or place name in every county in Ireland, and most of them multiple references. So I mean, there's just a selection. Height of the Badger set in County Derry. I like a homestead or townland of the Badger for Ballyrocky. Badger Warren and Brocha, and Brocha appears again and again. There are dozens of Irish Brochas. I was nearly going to count them all just so I could say. I counted them and they were, and I thought, no, I've got better things to do with my time. Brock's Hole in County Antrim, Legna Brochy from County Fermanagh, and Slevena Brock. So it's an animal that sort of lives in the landscape, both physically and in people's minds culturally. So yeah, an important creature in all respects. Then we're getting into sort of things that are non-mammalian. A Gaelic, this is a word that my mother would have used, and used quite often around County Down, but then It's for an earwig, or and this is where we're getting in, earwig, and some people say, no, it's an earwig. And I suppose some people have had a fight in a bar over that. And no, it's an earwig. No, an earwig. Of course, people believed. I think it goes back to sort of way back into sort of Anglo-Saxon times, and sort of people believed that when you went to sleep, earwigs crawled inside your ear and laid their eggs. Oh, stuff of nightmares. But I stuck that in an anatomical drawing because actually, Forficula auricularia refers to the fact that when its wings are exposed, they look like human ears. So is it earwig because it crawled into people's ears and it's got those horrible pincers in the back and it's going to lay its eggs in you? Or is it because when it spreads its wings, it looks like two human ears? You make your mind up. I'm going to bed an awful lot happier knowing that it's the wings. That's all I'll say. But a Gaelic, a Gaelic. Another one that used in County Town, a granny needle for a daddy long legs. Not much more you could say about that. I don't really know why a granny needle. And then a clegg. Okay, clegg's used through all parts of the UK and Ireland, but it is of Scots origin. And it wasn't actually until I was chatting to my mother, and she says, "You know why they're called a clegg?" And I no, she says, "Because it clings to you, it cleggs to you." And they would have used it interchangeably for the horsefly on the right, but also for ticks, because they clegg to you. So it's just these little wee nuances that you use a word all your life, and you think you know what it means, and then suddenly something clicks or something cleggs to your brain. I apologize for that. Simple one there, just a Scots word for a frog, a paddock or a puttock or a poddock, and you could go on and all variations on that theme. This is one of my favorites though, the man creeper. And my dad would have talked about a man creeper. If nobody knows what a man creeper is, it's a newt. And the reason it's called a man creeper, and it's one of my favorites, because if you go to sleep, beware, do not fall asleep with your mouth open, because if you do, the man creeper will crawl up over your belly and up and down into your throat and down into your belly, because it's lovely and moist and warm there, and the newt will have a lovely time in there, and then you're going to feel ill, and you've maybe got an upset stomach, but you know what's wrong. You fell asleep with your mouth open. Do you know the way around it? Simple, easy. You lean over a bucket of water and you drink a cup of salt. And when you drink the salt, that'll upset the newt in your stomach. And of course, he'll come up and he'll jump into the lovely water because he'll be parched from all the salt. So just be careful. Have a bucket of salt, have some table salt and a bucket of water beside your bed at all times if you wake up. But a great name, a man creeper. Of course, shows you, there's a limit to what people knew. The last place, even if it did feel so inclined to find somewhere dark, the last place the newt wants to be is somebody's stomach. Never mind the acids. They don't like it warm. They like, they're cold to the touch anyway. A man creeper, I think that's in itself mind blowing. Say nothing, keep your mouth shut, never true a word. And here's another one, slightly rude. Pismar for ants. Pismar. I wasn't actually going to include this because I thought I don't remember Pismar. And actually, I did. Honestly, part of the credit of this talk goes to my mother, because I did ring her last night and said, "Do you have any more?" Do you remember I asked your mum ages ago about different words, and you were telling me about Gaelics, and she just said to me straight away, she said, "Pismar." It almost I felt like going, "What? What? Sorry?" I said, "Pismar." And the reason it was called a pismar is because around the farm, whenever you dunged out the animals, you would have had a dung heap, and it would have been where all the urine and all the dung would have been, and the ants were believed to only live in amongst, pardon my French, the piss. And they would have called them dirty ants. So that's the name Pismar and Pishmore and different variants on that. And to the extent that she said that whenever somebody got bitten by an ant, because it would have been associated with the dung heap, you would have run in and put Dettol on the, worrying about a wee ant. But yeah, a pismar. And even ruder, I'm not actually going to tell you what these are. You can maybe look it up for yourself. There are some word names that are just rude. Great Skua and Arctic Skua. I have several names. One of them's an Allenhawk, but I thought I had the confidence to say these two words, but you know what? I'll just leave it. It's getting late night, and I don't want to offend anybody. But just if you like, the two words you would use for never do well. Oh, look at him; he's nothing but a and the great school, Arctic school, they're parasites. They steal from other birds. They're a robber. So, if you think of a word you wanted to use for somebody that you thought was a reprobate, yeah, a rude word that you might use, I'll save you the the embarrassment and save myself from getting into trouble. And this one is also very rude. The kestrel. And again, I can't pronounce the Irish. But it says it's sometimes translated as wind frolicker. So that's as far as I'm going. I think I got close enough to the other word. And it turns out in English, yeah, so wind frolicker. So a lot of people, in naming these birds, the physical attributes, where they're found, their habits. But sometimes people like to have a bit of fun, don't they? You know. And then I'll leave you, and this is the end of the talk, and I'll leave you this one, which I have no idea. This comes from a list of Northern Irish bird dialect name, and it's for a hen reed bunting, and it's called Mary of the Trousers. And I did try to look this up to find out how they got to Mary of the Trousers. I can only find that one reference, so it might only have just been a locally used word, but how did they get there? Mary of the Trousers. So anyway, I've left loads and loads out. I didn't have the time to pull everything together. So hopefully that's a bit of a scratching the surface. Maybe a bit too much for some people. But gives you a bit of a flavour at least of the bird names and the place in the landscape and the place in people's culture. And hopefully you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
I think there hasn't been like loads of questions, but there's been a few different discussions in the chat box. I don't know if you've noticed them or not. But H Price has a question about the root for kestrel, and also she was also asking about not Lappins. Start with kestrel, if you know that one.
Do you know what? Can't remember off the top of my head. There's only so many
Okay.
facts I can squeeze in here. And yeah, I should know that. If anybody else off the top of their head can remember, but I can't remember what the root of kestrel is. Probably Anglo-Saxon, I would imagine.
Petrol was another one they asked about.
No, I can't remember that one either. You see, I was looking more. I have my brain tuned into the local names,
Yeah.
as opposed to the standardized English names. So, but we certainly could find that out. You can find that out, no problem. In fact, I have a book at hand. There's just if people are interested in these things, actually, there are some particularly good books. There is there's a book written by a guy called Mark Cocker. I think it's Birds of Britain or British Birds. Particularly good. There's some very good websites. Place Names NI, which is basically the townlands and place names in Northern Ireland, and you can find an awful lot of the roots and the meanings of Irish and Scots place names. There's irishtownlands.ie is another good website that does similarly covers Northern Ireland, but also all of the Republic. There was a book that I saw on Amazon. I didn't buy it, but there is a book on Ulster Scots bird names. I think it's a couple of hundred pages long. And yeah, there is a website. There's a site called Bird Forum. But if you type in Northern Irish dialect bird names, there's a posting from 2008 that a guy compiled with several hundred Northern Irish bird names. It's very useful. So there's an awful lot of information out there if you do a bit of digging.
Okay. There's actually one of the ladies also posted about a book, Mrs. Morrow's Warbler. If anyone missed that in the chat box, Mrs. Morrow's Warbler by Stephen Moss. Beverly has recommended.
Okay, yeah, I'll have a look at that. Yeah.
That's another one for you. Peter's just saying that apparently the US American Ornithological Society are planning changing some names of birds. So
that's right.
It's just wondering if you've heard much about it or know anything about it.
Yeah. I mean, a classic example. It's because an awful lot of the birds, I'm trying to think. Okay, I've got my American bird book, or one of them here. But there's several reasons why they want to change the American names, because some of them don't actually they reflect more an imperial culture or a colonizing culture. For example, let's see, Stellar's Eider, named after the European explorer and adventurer and naturalist. So it's seen not as appropriate these days, because you're talking about a bird that would have been observed by native peoples for many thousands of years before any European saw them. So why should it have the name Stellar? So they'll come up with a more appropriate name. Another one I think that they're changing is for long-tailed duck, commonly known as old squaw. So old squaw being a female member of an Indian tribe or a native people's tribe. So that's seen as derogatory. And I think in general it's seen, in a way, I guess it is seen as culturally inappropriate and derogatory to people who've inhabited the North American landmass for, as I say, tens of thousands of years. And we come along and we decide, let me see, I'm sure I'll find them. It's usually the warblers. Yeah. Let's see. And my theory's not being borne out here because Townsend's warbler. There we go, named after Mr. Townsend. Is that appropriate?
Okay.
Well, the American Ornithological Society, they don't think so. So yeah, they're going through a process of standardizing all the bird names. Quite interesting. Quite interesting.
Okay. Something funky happening with my screen here. Has anyone got any questions if I take these off mute? If anyone wants to shout out, there's not a huge amount of questions in the chat box. See if I can do that. Or if anyone wants to pop up their hand and I can unmute you, or you can unmute yourself. If you've got a question you want to ask Andy directly. Anyone?
So it's me. I'm getting off lightly.
I think you're getting off too lightly. Hang on a second.
Oh, I don't know about that. No. Okay.
Hey, Andy, it's Chris.
Oh, how you doing, Chris?
Andy, just on the petrel, that's
Yes.
referred to St. Peter walking on water.
Ah, brilliant. Yeah,
Oh,
that's
interesting.
brilliant. That's brilliant.
But my favorite around here, a Strangford Loch bird name, is the tam pudding. Do you know what the tam pudding is?
Don't know. I don't know. I like it already though.
Tam pudding is brilliant. It's the dab chick,
Oh, right, tam pudding.
the little grebe.
And do you know what that means? That tam pudding.
I don't actually know.
It's great.
I don't know. Sometimes it said Tom pudding, but often it's tam pudding.
Yeah.
And no, I don't know what it means, but I just love it.
No, it's a great one.
Oh, it's just because it's a cute little bird, like some of the names that you mentioned in the talk.
Yeah, like that chick is a cute little name.
Yeah, sort of the diminutive bird gets a diminutive name,
Would it come from Tam O'Shanter being the same shape with the little pom-pom tail?
Could well be, yeah. Could well be. Who knows?
Could be, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, great talk. Thanks, Andy.
No, thank you. Thank you. Hopefully everybody enjoyed it.
Thank you. It was
Brilliant.
good fun. Got us thinking.
Yeah, great.
Good.
So interesting.
Good to know.
Okay.
Anyone else? Any questions you want to shout out? Frankie Smith is in the chat just asking what about an apple pick, Andy.
Apple pick. I don't know that one. I don't know.
And Bridget's just asking, would you know any other names for a robin?
Oh, I don't know. I do. I think the Irish for robin is Spidiog. SPI.
Yeah, I think you're right. Actually, so
it's one of the only Irish bird names that it can actually, it's stuck. It has stuck in there. Spidiog. I don't know what it actually means. I did actually look at some Irish bird names, and I tried to fit some of the things into the talk, but Yeah, some of them are quite interesting. The names for bullfinches and chaffinches and things like that. They're quite, like little red-breasted man of the woods and things like that. And yeah, it's quite interesting.
Okay. There was another question there, I seen a second ago. Robins. No, I think that might actually be it. Chaffinch. Any other alternative names for chaffinch that you're aware of?
Oh, I should.
Putting you under pressure here.
It is putting me under pressure. Yeah, I can't think off the top of my head, but sure, maybe maybe I could do a bit of research and get back to people.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Claire's asking, she said she might have missed it. I think she was slightly later than some of the rest is joining. Is there any other names for a slater or woodlouse?
I think the name a woodlouse is Slater. I think that's that's the alternative you get, Slater. Again, we think that's a very common word, and you think it's English, but actually, I think it's just
Answered it.
Scots.
It's just answered.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't the one I was going to. Hello?
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes. My name's Roy. My grandfather told me that when he was young, yellowhammers in County Antrim were very common. And he had a name for them, which I suspect was commonly used all over the UK. He called it scribbling lark.
Scribbling?
Scribbling lark. Because it's egg. Have you ever seen a yellowhammer's egg?
Oh, they do say that. In fact, you've just reminded me. They used to think that the yellowhammer was associated with the devil.
Yes.
Because and part of the reason I'm glad you've mentioned that. Part of the reason they thought it was associated with the devil was because on the eggs, the pattern on the eggs, people thought they were arcane symbols. So that makes sense. Scribbling lark.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. That's absolutely.
Yeah. I thought that was a brilliant name. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. See, that's the sort of thing that, wow, suddenly my mind's, all my synapses are firing. That's brilliant. That's a classic.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. So there we go. Tam pudding and scribbling lark are two words I'll take away with me. Two names. Brilliant.
Okay, just maybe one more question. Rachel is asking, is there any alternatives for kingfisher that you know of?
Oh, I don't know. No. It's another one I'll have to do some homework on. Yeah. There's so many local words that I can't fit them all in my head. But yeah, I certainly could find out if there's an alternative. There's bound to be.
So it would be quite interesting to see if there are any new, names coming along. Apart from just, anybody's interested in natural history knows about LBJs.
Yeah. Yeah. An awful lot of that'll be coming out of birdwatchers. Birdwatchers vernacular. So it's things like the Mippet. Usually these things that are what do you call it? Compressions of longer bird
say.
Simply because birdwatchers are lazy, but it also helps if say is an awful lot easier to shout out well, if you have to shout out Tasty, it's an awful lot easier than saying Black Guillemot. But that stage the birds have.
I think Fiona's iPad, not actually Fiona.
Yes.
Has a question.
Yeah. It's Roy again. I have a theory. When I was young, I was brought up in the shores of Lough Neagh, and everybody called herons crans.
Yeah.
And I've read, and it sounds, a pretty good idea, that the crane used to be found in Ireland.
Yeah.
And the cran is just a corruption of the original name.
Yeah.
And that the locals knew the difference between the two birds, but and then with the disappearance of the proper crane, the name still was preserved with our grey heron.
Yeah,
but maybe that's just an idea.
No,
I think that happened across the UK. I mean, I grew up in East Anglia, and there's a lot of cranes this and cranes that. Neighbour's farm called Cranes Farm. It's nothing to suggest that there's cranes in recent times there, or within at the time maybe when they named the farm, even though a lot of the farm buildings go back 400, 500, 600 years.
Yes.
So they just use it as a generic thing for both.
Yeah.
I've just remembered Swedish, it's trana, which sounds as if it's related, but they've got one country has misheard the other.
Yeah.
Okay. I have one last question, Andy, if you don't mind. Mythical birds, the phoenix, where does that come from? Do you know anything about it?
I think it's Greek. Is it the
That's
Greek?
ancient.
Is it?
Ancient Greek or
It's
Persian
pre-classical
mythology.
Greek.
Yeah, classical Greek or Persian, I would imagine. The Greeks,
Right, okay.
the Greeks like to, they must have, if they were able to say in the future, they must have thought, oh, it's brilliant that everybody's so inspired by us in our classical antiquity, because they nicked an awful lot of it from the Persians in terms of their mythology. So
The Persians had all the fire
Yeah.
stuff, the religion based on fire.
Yeah. So yeah, I would say if it was without going on to Wikipedia and cheating, I would say it's probably a Persian route. I could be wrong.
Okay.
But then, according to David Attenborough, people thought when they first got skins back from the Far East that birds of paradise just lived up in the air.
Yeah. Or barnacle geese, of course, as well.
There was a muddle with the platypus. I can't quite believe the barnacle goose one. I just think that was just a cozy Christian myth.
Oh no, that's to do with Friday. You could only
Yes, but I think it was a mechanism, and I'm sure they didn't really believe it.
It's the same with a beaver. What's that? Is that not a mammal? No, it's a fish. All right, are you sure? No, it's a fish. I'm eating it tomorrow, Friday. And the same would go with barnacle geese and and Brent geese and probably a whole slew of animals. Just so the table didn't seem to be too sparse on a Friday. Sick of eating fish.
I feel sorry for fish. So I'll eat birds and mammals. I try and avoid fish.
Yeah, well, people say they don't have any feelings, and then it's okay.
Oh well, yeah, idiots do. I mean, it's scientists have proved it, behaviorists have proved it. Anybody who's actually worked with fish knows they feel.
Yeah, of course.
You can see for yourself. I mean, the ones you see in the fish counter, obviously they're a bit dead and gone.
Yeah.
And fish are also mostly quite quiet.
Okay, so is there any last questions before we wrap it up?
Can't think of anything. We all need to get those dictionaries that tell you the roots of words, don't we?
Yeah.
It'd definitely be interesting.
Well, I'm just lazy. I'd rather listen to the talk.
Well, that was the point. I'm glad it was enjoyable.
No,
all right,
you.
folks. If that's the case, there's no real questions left. I'm glad you've all enjoyed it. Just to make these aware, there is talks on pretty much every Wednesday up until about the middle to the end of March. So you're welcome to sign up for any additional ones of those. I know most people here this evening are actually already members, so thank you very much for your support. If you're not a member, it's definitely worth considering signing up. At the minute, there is actually a special offer on the website for both adult memberships and family memberships, so it's worth checking out if you're not already a member. And if you are, again, thank you for your support.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thanks all.